Hi everyone, hope you're all enjoying the training. As Alistair said, my name is Carl Jeffries. I'm Digital Content Coordinator for the University of Manchester Library and the John Rylands Research Institute and Library. That was nice to hear a positive comment about the library just before I came on as well. It was good to hear. So today, as Val said, I'm going to be sharing some tips on how to make your social media more accessible. So social media accessibility is practice of making our content and campaigns usable by as many people as possible. At least 1 in 5 people have a long-term illness, impairment, or disability. Many more may have temporary or situational disabilities as well. And accessible social media ensures that our content and channels can be accessed and understood by the widest possible audience, regardless of whether they've got a visual, hearing, speech, motor, cognitive, or other kind of combination of impairment. Making our social media accessible isn't, well, it's not technically required under current government guidelines, as is the case with the kind of website. It's certainly the right thing to do. And I think ultimately as well, it'll help the campaigns reach more of the people you kind of want it to. So you can see some examples on the slide there as well. It's been hitting the headlines more in the mainstream recently. I think these are all from those two from the past kind of 6 to 12 months. Perhaps more to do with being more people kind of taking social media to connect and observe these during lockdown. But you can see the first one there, Wall Street Journal, covering the backlash against the new voice tweets feature from Twitter, which didn't have any options for captioning. I think they argued that it was an early test, but they still caught quite a lot of flack for that, rightly so. Second slide there, you can see Forbes discussing Clubhouse's lack of accessibility. So Clubhouse is for anyone who's not aware, it's a social networking app based on audio chat. I think the issues with the app weren't just about lack of things like live captioning, but also quite a few issues with readability and interface. I've not used it myself. It's invitation only, and I've obviously not got the right connections, but if anyone is using it, they may have seen some of those issues as well. And also that last slide there, well, it's not a kind of headline or front page, if you like. It's also represents, we're seeing more kind of social media influencers with disabilities who are using the channel to kind of share their experience and some of the difficulties they face with accessibility. So you can see that one's Chrissy Can't Hear You, her account is called, and she's got 1.2 million followers. Her content's been seen almost 30 million times. She's one of a handful of kind of really influential kind of social media users with big followings who are kind of drawing more attention to this topic as well. So it's certainly becoming a much bigger talking point. So what can we do to make our social media accessible? I'm going to share 10 tips. So tip 1 is to write in plain language. By that we mean writing it's clear, concise, easy to understand for your intended user. It helps make the information more accessible to people who may have disabilities affecting reading, comprehension, cognitive functions. And while it's not an exact science, some of the kind of general principles are choosing common words that are easy to understand, aiming for 1 point or idea per sentence, writing in the active voice. So that's putting the emphasis on the person or thing that drives the action instead of the person or thing experiencing the action. Example maybe rather than passive, maybe I've been interviewed by the manager, an active version of that, maybe the manager interviewed me, emphasis being on the manager driving the kind of action there. Writing the active voice helps the reader to understand the content of your sentence far more quicker than if they had to kind of decode a longer sentence written in a passive voice. So certainly something to consider. I think I read it also reduces your word count by kind of 10 to 15%. So it's also useful for kind of anyone scanning the feed if you're looking to kind of grab people's attention with a short and punchy tweet. And a fourth tip there in regards to plain language is just to avoid jargon, acronyms, technical language. That one in particular may be tricky being in an academic environment and kind of writing about research and science and kind of industry, but kind of keeping that in mind can help make your message more efficient, and working with character limits, it's probably something we do a lot without thinking too much about it anyway. Next tip is making it easy to read. So this is more about the kind of format rather than the words shared. So using short sentence and paragraphs, maybe stick to kind of 20 to 25 words per sentence, and try and avoid large chunks of text. If anyone's scribbling down, by the way, don't worry too much about making notes. We can share the slides after, and there's guidance on the internet as well. So yeah, don't worry too much about that. Using line breaks to create space in your social posts, so spreading out your copy, making it clear to read. So that's kind of a similar thing to what we do on the website, where we're kind of breaking up paragraphs and making it easy to scan. Avoid using bold, italics, or capitalized text in your posts. They can make things more difficult to read. And avoid using non-standard symbols as substitutes for words and messages. They can also confuse screen reading software. So example of that may be mathematical symbols. You know, right, kind of accessibility equals everyone's responsibility. You know, that kind of choice of phrase, if you like. But again, as to that can confuse screen reading software. So maybe best not to take that route. Using hashtags considerately. So using camel case for multi-word hashtags. If anyone's unfamiliar with camel cases, that means capitalizing the first letter of every word in a hashtag so that people can read each word individually. Not doing this can make it difficult for people and screen readers to read. I googled where that term camel case came from. It's actually to do with the hump of a camel. It's quite an unusual term, but I was just curious. It's, yeah, if you imagine the C in the case being the hump of the camel. Yeah, maybe I should have put an illustration there, but if you're curious, to Google it up. Try not to use more hashtags than necessary. Using too many hashtags can make your post complicated more than it needs to, and trying to kind of feature your hashtags and also mention towards the end of your post just to avoid disrupting the flow of your sentence. I mean, you can see an example there, that kind of Black Lives Matter might be pronounced by a screen reading software more like Black Lives, the verb matter, rather than Black Lives Matter. So it's quite a good example of where that might not work. Providing clear onward links. So ensure calls to action provide a clear onward journey. So for example, rather than click here or read more, you may want to go more along the lines of subscribe to our newsletter or sign up for our events, or kind of visit our website. Yeah, so using kind of click here and read more without any additional context is quite bad for screen reader users. Limit links to one post, as people who navigate via keyboard shortcuts may find it frustrating to navigate through multiple links. It's something on Twitter, for instance, you may want to break that up into a thread in different tweets. Using full links and avoid shortened versions. Sometimes this may be unavoidable if we're using kind of marketing, promotional kind of URLs and whatnot, but the majority of social platforms don't count links towards your character count anyway. And keeping full strings can help to indicate where links take people, so it can be useful to kind of keep them as a full URL. Also consider indicating when links lead to videos, audios, etc. So user will know what to expect before clicking through. That could just be kind of putting it in bracket as vid or something that's quite obvious. You may want to also consider including trigger warnings if the link you've taken people to have potential to upset people. Tip 5 is to use emojis sparingly, so avoid repeating emojis. I don't think many screen readers acknowledge when an emoji is used, but will read out exactly what it sees. So the example there would be read as clapping hands, which, when you've seen kind of whole strings of emojis, you can imagine how long that would take to read out and how it could be frustrating for certain users. So in that respect, maybe limiting your emojis to kind of 2 or 3 per post as well is a good idea. Again, using them towards the end of sentences just to avoid the kind of disrupting the flow of reading sentence out, and avoid using them as substitutes for words or to communicate kind of core messages. Again, this could be missed by people using screen readers. I think the same for emoticons as well. I don't think emoticons are used as much as emojis nowadays, but again, that can be, when you hear them kind of read out, it's not a good experience for the user. So Always provide alt text descriptions. So alt text is kind of alternative descriptions. Where possible, any important information image needs to be described in alt text for visually impaired users. It allows people to visualize images where they can't see them. Missing or ineffective alt text is reported as one of the most problematic aspects of web accessibility. So this is a particularly important one to get right, I think. I think most social media tools and platforms do have options to add alt text these days. Sometimes that needs kind of activating in your settings. I think Twitter, you have to go into your settings to activate it before it actually becomes an option when you're posting. And when writing alt text, try to keep the description short and specific. Try to imagine maybe how you'd explain the information in a picture over the phone. That could help you kind of think. So, example, a smiling student working at a laptop at their desk in the bedroom. Any words that feature an image must also be described in the text. If you've got kind of words within your graphic there, make sure they're included as well. You can skip to an image of or photograph of, because I don't think that's really required. It's quite an obvious thing. And maybe add a description in your caption if there's no option for alt text in the platform you're using. It can also be added to GIFs as well. I think for this one, it's about more of kind of making a habit, getting into a good habit with it really helps with that one. There was a graphic at the bottom which I seem to have deleted for some reason, but I can put that in again when we share the slides. It was just to kind of represent that some of the platforms are kind of getting better in this regard. I know Facebook have been offering AI alt text generation for a few years now. It's not perfect, but it's something they're kind of looking to update. I think they've made some updates to that recently, which are good. So maybe before long, that will become a kind of an automated task for most platforms. Design for users. So this one's more about kind of graphics and kind of designing your assets, creating your assets rather than kind of writing your text in your posts. So ensure there's enough context between your background text and other components. People have color vision deficiency or who switch to grayscale. It's quite an important thing. Ideally, contrast between a text color and its background should be 4.5 to 1. If you're not sure kind of what that means or what that looks like, there are web tools like the WebAIM color contrast checker or color contrast checker, which can help you to kind of check the background. There's a screenshot there of what that looks like with the university kind of purple against white. That kind of shows the contrast ratio, and with normal text, that's a pass there. It'll tell you if it's not great by a fail as well. Try to use colors to convey a key message in isolation. Avoid using bold, italics, or complex fonts, which can be difficult to read. And if you're struggling to cram text in, maybe consider using fewer words. It often results in a better graphic anyway. Thinking about how people actually see them on a tiny kind of mobile screen, you don't want to cram too much in. So tip 8 is about providing subtitles and alternative media for your audio and video. So audio and video published on our websites, and content should be delivered in a way that ensures everyone can access it. So when posting a video, make sure you always use video captions and subtitles. Make sure it's kind of large and high contrast enough to read. Particularly important for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, but also benefits engagement as a whole, because a lot of people don't listen to the audio on the videos. They kind of tend to watch in silence and read the captions. Make sure your important information videos is conveyed audibly as well as visually. So if there's key text on screen, that should also be read out or included in the body of text. And provide transcripts for audio-only content, such as podcasts. There's a really good guide that's been recently released by Comms and Marketing team that's on StaffNet, so it makes it clear what to provide and when, the difference between open and closed captions, instructions on how to create captions, and also recommended companies would it be quite a time-consuming process if you're considering kind of outsourcing that. It's got a recommendation for that as well. Tip 9 is to build accessibility into planning from the beginning. So yeah, it should be built in from the start, really. It shouldn't be an afterthought or a nice to have. It's definitely the right thing to do, and it also helps your campaigns to reach more of the people you need it to. So make sure when if you use a content planner, I'll put kind of a screenshot of one of our kind of Excels with the content plan for Rylands, and you can see there's a column there for alt text. So we know that's kind of built in and being considered from the beginning. Include time in your schedule for adding captions and checking for readability, particular captions and subtitling. Don't underestimate how long that takes, particularly if you're exporting your video, for instance, in multiple formats for, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, they all kind of have different dimensions. So you may need to adapt the captions for each format. And try and make time to familiarize yourself with accessibility and the assistive technologies as well. Start with testing the screen reading support on your mobile, for instance. That's it can be quite an eye-opening experience just to kind of dip in and have a go at these technologies, and it'll help to make you think about it from a user point of view as well. And the last one I put there is just some tips to kind of keep up to date with the latest changes. So while the biggest social media platforms have been quite slow in providing accessible features, progress is being made. You can see some of the screenshots there. Alternative text, Twitter kind of fairly recently released a Fleets feature, which is a bit of an Instagram stories kind of rip-off, but that allows alt text. And the one in the top right, I think, is TikTok, and that has a kind of a trigger warning feature. And then we've got TikTok underneath as well with a text to speech. I don't think any of this are actually on TikTok, but this is just to highlight that it's kind of some of the big platforms are making steps in this regard. And in Instagram as well, I've also added caption stickers for stories. I think that was just tested. I'm not sure if that's kind of a fully built-in feature, but you can see that the companies are kind of starting to take notice and hopefully thinking about it a bit more. But as with everything digital, it's really important to keep up with the latest changes. So there's a few accounts there that you may want to follow. Twitter Accessibility Zone, Twitter account, and Facebook are on Twitter as well. I think they've got a Facebook page. And then the Government UK digital team are really, really good on the accessibility front, so certainly consider following them. Particularly interesting to read about they've kind of created an empathy lab in their headquarters where users can go in and actually kind of experience assistive technology and give them better understanding of kind of how the user experiences their content. So that brings us towards the end of those tips. Just say to finish off, remember that we all have to play a part with this. It can be a challenge to get it 100% right because obviously the platforms and technologies merge and people's needs change over time. But making a commitment to adopting good habits and following the kind of best practice emerging on accessibility, I think certainly should be a priority for us all. So hopefully these tips will be a good starting point for any of you. I think that brings us to the end. So